So as the Ducks go into the Big Ten, there are now 18 teams in the Big Ten. Does it make sense? Not really, no. But welcome to college football in 2024. So Oregon's one of the schools I would put in the first tier. Perennial conference title contenders when the programs are being run correctly. That is an important distinction for what I am going to say. The next tier are teams that every few years could legitimately contend for or win a conference championship, but they don't sustain it, or they haven't proven the ability to sustain it, or I think they could. And tier 3 is everybody else. Contending for a conference title once every 10 years, maybe. Think Colorado in the Pac-12. Northwestern in this league gets to the conference title game more often than you'd think, though that was when the Big Ten had divisions. I don't know if Northwestern, even though they have a good head coach in David Braun, at least I think he's a good head coach so far, don't know if they're going to make the Big Ten championship game again. I legitimately, I don't know if they're going to be able to do that again. That is a fair question to ask about a variety of programs. So the obvious teams at the top of the conference that will push Oregon both on and off the field are Ohio State and Michigan. Those two are readily apparent. The other two that I'd put a notch below for different reasons are Washington and USC. Now, the reason I'd have them up there as the perennial conference contenders is a qualifier that I talked about when I began this segment. If the programs are being run correctly. If USC is being run correctly, Oregon should have legitimate issues recruiting the Southern California area because all the guys are going to USC. Is USC being run correctly? A lot of people would argue right now that they are not. Still, Lincoln Riley is not someone whose stock I've completely sold. I know it's a popular opinion to say Lincoln Riley stinks, he's terrible, he's only won fewer than 10 games once in his coaching career. And I know that he's going to a new league where they play a lot more defense and they're much more physical. That's going to be an adjustment. You know what else is an adjustment? The Big Ten is going to play USC, and USC knows how to score points. That side of the conversation. Listen to me. I sound like some big USC homer defender. I think you all know that I am not. But to say that it's a one-way street, I just do not subscribe to that particular notion. So, yeah, if USC figures it out, if D'Anton Lynn is as good as I think he is as the Trojans defensive coordinator, and if they start upping their recruiting prowess and they keep, the recruits coming in at a top 10, 15 level every year, yeah, they'll be able to make Big Ten championship games. They will be able to push Oregon. It'll be a circle game on the schedule, not just because of the Pac-12 history, but because of how good USC's team could be in a given season. So those are the ones that I think when they are at their best. And then Washington, right? For a long time, you wouldn't have said this about Washington. However, they eventually found the right coach and they went to that conference championship level. And when they have the right coach, they can play on the same level as Oregon. That has been proven over the last, what do we say? Peterson was hired like 2016 or so. So 8 years. Over the last 7-8 years, Washington's proven that that's the case. Now, are either one of those teams going to be at that level in 2024? No, they are not. Oregon is a better team than both by I think, a pretty sizable amount. USC is rebuilding their defense. I think they'll be able to, and they'll be improved, but they won't be great yet. And Oregon was a considerably better team a year ago when they matched up. And Washington is just in a complete and total reset. But Jedd Fisch, if he sticks around, which is an if, he's a Florida guy, and that job might come open within the next year or two, and he'll be a candidate. Jedd Fisch is a good football coach, and he can recruit a little. You go look at what he did down in Arizona. Remember, Tetairoa McMillan went to Arizona to go play for Jedd Fisch. That's a guy who was down to Arizona and Oregon. And that was the first time my head really turned and said, wait, Arizona's coach is who? The guy, that guy that came down from the Patriots or the Rams, he was like a quarterback's coach. He got who to go to Arizona? Yeah, and he's had a big impact. And he's going to have a big impact once again for the Wildcats this season. So those are the other programs that I think can build themselves to perennially be where we all expect Oregon to be with the way that Dan Lanning has proven himself to be as a coach, as a recruiter, and his ability to pull guys in the transfer portal. Now, The schools in the next tier are maybe the most interesting of the bunch because without divisions, it becomes a lot more open. It becomes it has a much different feel to it than it would have had Oregon gone into the Big Ten and been on the side of, say, Iowa and who else was over there? Purdue was there. And, the teams that Ohio State and Michigan would just blast when they got to the Big Ten championship game. The conference championship doesn't work like that anymore. So the programs that I think are in tier 2, but can fluctuate up to tier 1 in the same way that, Washington and USC can kind of float down to be tier 2 teams in a given year. These are programs that I see potential with, that I have seen promise, that I see upside for. I don't know if they have the same ceiling. I mentioned Iowa a moment ago. They are absolutely in that category. They will play among the best defense in all of college football. They're the inverse of USC. USC just needs to play average defense. Iowa just needs to play average offense. Iowa was a 10-2 football team last year. They have a very high floor under Kirk Ferentz, the same as Penn State with James Franklin. They have a very high floor. I have not seen the evidence, and both coaches have given me a sizable sample size, or a substantial sample size, to where I feel confident putting them in this ring of teams in the Big Ten. This ring of programs is really the evaluation that I'm going with right now, that I know they are going to be baseline expectations, 7 to 8 win teams every year. Upward momentum can carry them to 10 or maybe even 11. But they struggle against the big boys. Iowa was 10-2 last year. They played Tennessee in a bowl game with Nico Iamaleava starting his first ever game. They got blanked 35-0. So they were still a good team. They won games. They're not great. They're not at that sort of level. Penn State, their record against Ohio State and Michigan, which is where Oregon expects to be at that sort of level, and where they certainly are this year and will be in the coming years. Penn State has consistently been really good, significantly better than the rest of the Big Ten, but not on the same level as Ohio State and Michigan. They beat them every now and then, but they haven't done that consistently. So that'd probably be like bottom of tier 1, but are they conference title contender? Not perennially, no. Could they get there? Maybe. A couple other programs to watch for. These are ones have coaches that are, kind of early in their tenures, so the long-term outlook is going to be stronger than the short-term outlook. Nebraska, Wisconsin, Michigan State. This is year 2 for Matt Rule. It's going to be year 2 for Luke Fickell at Wisconsin. Pretty sure I have that right. And Oregon has to go to Wisconsin in November. That's not a game you can sleep on. Luke Fickell was the offensive coordinator at Ohio State once upon a time. I think he's a good coach. Took Cincinnati to the playoff. And we know what Jonathan Smith can be. He is now at a place at Michigan State that has way more financial backing than most people realize. If you looked at the total amount of funding and NIL availability, which I don't know as much about, but I've heard Josh Pate talk about this, and I've spoken to people who cover Michigan State and talked about this as well. Michigan State, if you were to do total athletic department, budget, including NIL, which we can't really get exact figures for, they would be in the top tier of the Big Ten. They would not be a tier 2 spending and resources program. They have what they need to be great. They made a 4-team playoff with Mark D'Antonio. And I'm sure Oregon fans remember those battles in 2014 and 15, a couple of great games with a couple of programs that were operating at a very high level, and they were good, competitive, top 10 matchups, and the home team won both times. That's what they can be. Going to take them a while. This is year 1 for Jonathan Smith and company, and I'm going to talk more about that game a little bit in the last segment on today's show, but I think those guys have real long-term outlooks that are good, but in the short term, not going to be more than 8-win teams anywhere. Like Nebraska, I actually think could win 8 games this year. Wisconsin, tough schedule. They're probably 6 or 7. Michigan State, probably not making a bowl game this year. They got hit in the transfer portal really hard. Abe Childs will have his young quarterback growing pains. Tremendously talented guy. I mean, really, really talented guy. But I think that's a pretty comprehensive assessment of where where the other teams sit in relation to Oregon. Ohio State, Michigan, when they're right, on the exact same level and can get there quickly. I think Michigan pulls back a little this year and then probably recoils back into, Big Ten championship or bust in 2025 and beyond. Washington, USC need 1 year, maybe 2, depending on which one you're talking about, to get to that sort of level. And then the other teams I either have questions about or they're just kind of a couple of years away.